another response video to Antakantavad. Okay, I listened to the first like minute and a half of this, and you know, he's just misparaphrasing. I mean, he's not accurately describing what I said, which is, you know, fundamentally problematic. So let's play the whole video and see what happens.
Gary, thank you for your response. Just a quick question, quick clarification. When you're talking about the lizards, or it was dinosaurs, where you said that you would expect the dinosaurs to change their natures, how does that...
No, that's not what I said. I'd expect them to change their behavior. I'd expect them to reject their nature, hate their nature, even despise that aspect of themselves. Reject it. Say, no, it's not good enough. Okay? Alright, I'm not wearing a shirt on purpose in this video. Because, yeah, this is our nature. We know that where we came from. We came from, you know, people 40,000 years ago who weren't doing anything very sophisticated at all. And we fundamentally have changed our behavior. We shave our face. We do a lot of things. We negotiate with women now. We do a lot of things very different. Because we know that nature was garbage. And we say it wasn't good enough. And so we adapt and change because we understand that wasn't good enough. We acquire knowledge and say, look, it'd be a good idea to make toilets and do other things to clean up our act a little bit.
Meet the objection that we're essentially expecting a mouse to pull a plow designed for a horse.
Again, that's so you're describing something impossible and putting it in the same category as something as possible as changing perception, of recognizing that, yeah, this is no good, let's do something better, let's do something, you know, nobody's asking human beings to fly to the moon on their own, right? But as a group, as a society, they can fly to the moon. So, you know, I can't really use your metaphor unless I'm allowed to say, well, 1,000,000 mice can hook themselves up to little tiny harnesses and they can have the power of a horse. They can do what a horse does. So it's not beyond their capacity if they all, each one, sacrifice a little. If they all vote a certain way, the world changes. So I'm just saying you're setting it up with as some impossibility, pigs flying, and suggesting that when I say human beings can have a perception that it's better to negotiate with women than to rape women, that those two things are the same thing. It's a pig flying. And it's not a pig flying.
Or we are expecting a horse to crawl around through little door holes at the bottom of the wall and eat cheese and thumb their nose at Sylvester the cat. Is it rational or reasonable?
Well, like I said, maybe you should use as a fairer analogy two organisms of the same weight and size that have a different nature, the scorpion and, say, the frog. And can the scorpion change its behavior and not sting the frog? You know, to use a common metaphor, a story, whatever. But yeah, and I'm just arguing that, of course, we've already demonstrated the possibility through 40,000 years of human evolution. I'd say 10,000 years specifically of language and cultural evolution. So we've demonstrated through those 10,000 years a huge potential to change behavior. We've seen humans in all kinds of manifestations, all kinds of, you know, National Geographic, just, you know, all kinds of tribes living out all kinds of different human adventures, wearing all kinds of different superhero suits, so to speak, doing all kinds of wacky different rituals and doing all kinds of different things. So we've certainly demonstrated a huge mutability in terms of what we need, what we desire, and all of that stuff. So, I mean, obviously these things are easily changed by how we are maturated, or the children of these tribes accept these traditions, accept these behaviors, become horny for the thing that becomes defined as desirable. I mean, there's a group of people in India or something, I think it is, you know, where the men have acquired a taste for large women, and so they force feed the girl children because men want them fatter, because that's somehow a sign of, you know, virility or whatever the thing is, that yes, I climbed the mountain, so to speak, I guess. You know, intuitively it doesn't make any sense that this could at all be a good strategy, but apparently it does happen, that they can modify their taste, their conditioning, through this, how they're maturated, that men actually find this something they don't go outside of, that they find this an acceptable, yes, they become horny for it. So they, you know, they have, yeah, they've modified themselves. All right, through a perception, through somebody changing behavior and the others mimic that behavior, and that behavior becomes the standard behavior. And that's sort of what we're just arguing here. We're just arguing about a subtle change in human perception. We're not arguing about huge changes in perception. We're not arguing about huge sacrifices in terms of fundamental lifestyle. We're not saying people can't eat food. I'm not saying it anyway. I'm not even saying they have to eat a certain kind of food, or, you know, they're going to be thrown in jail. I'm just arguing for the fact that they would argue that if future generations shouldn't be brainwashed into bad habits, and that if you're going to brainwash them into something, you should brainwash them into good habits.
Expectation for something to be something that it is not. Now, I choose my words carefully here.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't think it's very careful. I don't think it's very fair to the argument. Like I said, I think I can just claim that you're comparing apples and oranges. A change in perception is not a pig flying.
Again, I don't want to sort of corner you with this semantic thing. You say that we should be something. We should rather change our nature. You would expect us to...
Again, that's not what I said. What I said is we should change our behavior. We should reject errors and flaws and waste, because we have the knowledge to recognize it. So we should just reject it and say, okay, let's change what we got to change so we don't waste. Let's build bathrooms. Yeah.
Change our nature in accordance with our intelligence. Now, I would say that I disagree with you, because I would say that that's not possible, and it creates conflict in the form of guilt.
Right. So I'm just saying, I don't think your disagreement is rationally based then, okay? What can I tell you? I think it's really easy for people to give it things like believing they need to procreate or something. Those desires are not innate. The innate desire is a desire for sex. Procreation is clearly just a cultural thing. I mean, people want it because everybody else is doing it, kind of thing, keeping up with the Joneses, all that kind of shit. I'd say having kids is less immutable than people's desire for a 45-inch TV. I mean, I really do. I think it's harder for people to give up on having their 45-inch TV than it is for them to give up having children. I mean, it's not difficult at all. It's completely just entirely a perception of mind. It's like the perception that humans need to exist in the universe. It's a completely made-up perception of value, and it's completely dissectable and completely revertible by just doing a little bit of thought experimenting. And then once you do that thought experiment, you realize that your perception is just an ego-based perception, that you're just uncomfortable with the idea of your finitude. Okay, and you want to somehow escape your finitude.
And guilt is coercion. Guilt is internal conflict. It's internal aggression. It's sublimated aggression. Sublimated harm. It is harm. It lacerates your mind.
Well, look, I don't want to argue the point, but we've really been over this, and I don't agree with any of that at all. I think it's completely a constructive process of recognizing flaw or error or mistake and correcting for it. Again, correcting for it. Correcting for it is not pig flying. Correcting for it is just acknowledging something as being stupid or wrong or idiotic, and then you just habituize yourself to the new world you exist in. You change your behavior, and as you change your behavior, you acclimate to the new circumstance. You become comfortable with the new tradition. I mean, a woman could go from wearing to riding a side saddle to riding Western style, or whatever they call it. Right? She could just swing that leg over and say, "Fuck this bullshit. I'm going to acclimate to a new way." And it's not that big of a transition.
What I would say is, I would sort of rephrase what you say, simply to read, I would hope that, or perhaps even expect that, we would consciously act in a way that is not in accord with certain aspects of our nature. Now, the emphasis is essentially what's important here, because at the end of the day...
Yeah, well, again, it was not so much the emphasis, but yeah, it's what you're, until you get to specific things that we must change about ourselves, you had that, these require different approaches, right? I mean, like I said, some of the things are just perceptual, some of them are addictions, like a food preference. So yeah, you got changing food preferences, a little more complicated, but you have to winnow yourself off. An addiction has to be treated differently, okay? Because addictions are things where you'll have withdrawal symptoms and all this other crap. So yeah, there's different aspects of ourselves that we could say we need to migrate the human being to a different human being. We have to go from somebody who needs to drive an SUV to somebody who loves to drive a golf cart. And that transition might require something, but every little calculation of what we would say, this is how we need human beings, this is the new harness they have to wear, this is the new way of being a mouse who pulls a plow, and so you gain a new habit of, yes, I will sacrifice 15 minutes a day doing my exercises to strengthen my plowing muscles. Not a big deal.
The overt actions are the same. But it's just, are we reacting against guilt? Are we being held to an impossible standard, but that impossible...
Again, I'm arguing from a position where I'm already there, so I know it's not hard to get there. And I got there being born just like everybody else into a culture and into a society that told me what the truth was, and I did try to accept it. I mean, I tried to acclimate to the world and say, yes, this somehow makes sense, but I have now recognized that my rejection was valid, and the migration is, they are the ones that need to migrate. The unsustainable, unethical behavior of human beings needs to be migrated.
Standard is a form of motivation for us. There's an ideal up there that we know that we can't really meet because we're not constructed that way. But we should use that as our goal, because if we don't use that as our goal, then we are somehow not changing our nature when we should change our nature.
Well, again, it's not, no one's asking everybody to put on a soldier suit and go to war and shoot guns and do all this stuff. They're just asking them to recognize that this job needs to get done. That's the first giant step is the will part, the will to do it. It's not so much how you get it done, because, again, you can find people that are acclimated to it. You can find a way to get it done that doesn't require somebody to do something they can't do. There's lots of options here. Again, you're not saying one man has to land on the moon. I mean, even that line, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. I mean, when talking philosophy, we're talking about mankind, and we're saying, well, here we have these men, and this is what men have to do. This is the constituents you need. You need a certain number of scientists that can do this, and you need a certain bunch of laborers can do that. You need people to find their niche contribution to make this thing happen. And you're not saying that people who hate math have to be mathematicians, and you're not saying that people who hate labor have to be laborers.
I'm just sort of using your terminology. If I've misread you, then just correct.
I
correct
did.
Me. You said you would expect these lizards to change their nature.
Again, that's a really important misquote. I wouldn't expect them to change their nature. I would expect, as I pointed out, their higher order brain to be acknowledged as existing and being part of who they are now, and that they have to acclimate to what the new senses, makes apparent. And the new senses are going to make the old behavior repulsive if they're applying logic.
Okay, so it does look as though you say that they should be non-lizard-like. You would expect them to change what they are.
Again, I would expect them to change what they do.
I would say that sort of puts the emphasis on more or less another punishment, a fear of punishment. The expectation to change our nature is based upon the fear of failure to meet expectation.
Well, again, if we take this to a real subject like procreation, I'm going to argue that this is all just mush, right? And I could argue that we don't even have to change the nature of any humans if we just advocate for the non-brainwashing of the next generation. Because I've never had any desire to procreate. It was never part of my nature to procreate. Yes, it was part of my nature to have penis fun. But there is nothing in my nature saying I need a little me around. Frankly, my nature 40,000 years ago wouldn't even know it's a little me. Didn't know anything about genetics or, any of that crap. So it wouldn't even be an idea. I've said this before, but I'm saying it's not the nature of most animals, okay, I'd almost say all animals, to have prodigy. Okay, it's an accident of what they really want, which is sex. They don't think I'm making babies while they're doing it. They're not after making babies. They're after the desire satisfaction. So their nature has absolutely nothing to do with procreation. And so we just invent simple little barrier methods there. Procreation is now out of the question. It doesn't happen. And there's no nature violated. No part of my nature is violated by being sterile. None. Any part of my behavioral nature. Right? You could argue that I'm fiddling with my organs. Well, so what? We put in pacemakers. We do lots of things that fiddle with our organs. But there's nothing in my nature that says pacemaker bad. Just like there's nothing in my nature that says sterilization is bad.
I would say that we should consciously opt not to act in accordance with certain aspects of our nature, not because these aspects are bad, but because certain circumstances are neither the time nor the place to do this.
Yeah, well, great. Where did I say I was opposed to playing semantics games that makes it easier for people to do the right thing? I mean, I've never said that if you want to try, again, try to do it with carrots, encourage people to modify rather, through some sort of positive mechanism. Again, like that's a cultural mechanism. You want to change behavior. Yeah, well, you reward and you idolize, and you have American Idol shows where people cure cancer and stuff and have a real competition, and then kids will say, oh shit, instead of being a stupid asshole, you know, whatever, entertainer, I'll be a scientist, or I'll be, you know, yeah, so it's a positive change, not a negative change. You didn't drive them to it with guilt, you drove it to them with desire. And where did I say I'm against that anywhere? Oh yeah, I haven't said that at all. I've said exactly that same thing. Let's make the change as easy as possible.
For example,
You know, the easiest change is not to break the kid in the first place. I mean, I'm going to argue that everything we're discussing, and probably in terms of perspective and philosophy, is something, if you don't break it in the first place, you don't have a problem. If you don't create the false expectations, if you don't sit there and lie to your kids and create this nonsensical notions about what is valuable, then you wouldn't have this problem in the first place.
if you turn on the TV, it would look as though humans are fascinated by violence. There's just so much of it on television. Now, should they be fascinated by violence? That's not the same question as, are they fascinated by violence? If we are fascinated...
I think the simple jumping past the who cares whether it's a why or how issue is the fact that, yeah, I think we fucking know that if we don't raise them to find it at all interesting, they won't find it at all interesting. My father never owned a gun, never talked about a gun, never said, look, a gun, never made guns interesting at all, and somehow I also acquired no interest whatsoever in gunnery. And we can see the opposite is true, right? Have guns in the house, have gun lore, talk about guns, use guns, play with guns, and yes, the person becomes a gunner. Yeah, okay, not that complicated.
Fascinated by violence. It doesn't do us any good to simply say we shouldn't be. We should see what it means to be human, and if this is...
Well, again, I don't think violence is anything. Competition is I would argue, is our nature. Our nature is very competitive, very selfish. But we can find games to play that don't have violence as part of the competition. Olympic athletes, whatever you want to, you know, those sports are not competitive in the sense they're competitive. They're not contact sports, generally speaking. You know, and they've brought them in now, basketball and hockey. Basketball used to not be a contact sport, but it's changed. But yeah, that's, you know, so the world is, they're changing, they're bringing violence into that arena. But I'm just saying there's no reason, it doesn't have to be part of the human game. The human game is a competitive game, not a violent game. It's only because we've allowed the rednecks, the buffoons, the morons, the idiots to control our society that the stupid food, the cruder food, has become the food. And so violence is the easy, most overt gladiator game.
Part of what we are, what is an outlet for this that is not disruptive to other beings? Rather than saying, I must not be this way, when, if we want to use our reptilian nature, is constantly telling us we are this way.
Well, again, I fundamentally disagree. I think we are like all great apes. I think we have hierarchy built into us. We have alphaness, but I don't think violence is the expression of it. I think it can be expressed in a lot of ways. The competition can be satisfied in a lot of ways, and they don't require violence.
Guilt is a very poor motivator, and there are those who believe that guilt actually contributes to violence and crime. Freud even said that guilt comes before the overt crime, or he suggested it. So I would say that guilt is actually an inefficient motivator if...
Yeah, well, whatever. I would argue that Freud would say, though, that that sometimes the guilt actually wins and prevents the crime. So, yeah, the thought of implications, the imagination of risk and possibilities are imagined before the risk act is perpetrated. The desire satisfaction is attempted. And so there's some measure of guilt, but I think Freud would concede that if they had a little more guilt, they might not have done the act at all.
Results are what matters. If all that we're doing is fleeing the lash, as opposed to moving...
Well, again, that's your statement, if all that we are doing. So what I'm saying is that's not all I'm doing. I'm not... I became a vegetarian, and yeah, I could say that some measure of my change and modification of my behavior was through some sort of, I did feel some guilt or some kind of sense of responsibility, some sort of sense of wrongness. But it's completely all affirmative and positive beyond that. So there's to argue that that is all we are doing is being motivated by guilt. No, we're being motivated by an overriding ideal, a shining city on a hill. And that is what we're after, and that is the thing that's making us capable of overcoming what we have to compromise to do it. And the mechanism of doing that is some recognition of disappointment with self or disappointment with potential outcomes in not fighting the fight. I mean, we know the fight has to be fought, so to speak. Once you acknowledge that the war has to be fought, then it's just a measure of who dies and who doesn't. And certainly you're going to have some measure of guilt if you're not making your contribution. If you're part of the soldiery and you never take point, you never volunteer to be the lead guy, it's just a fact that you're just, you're not playing fair.
Towards something, consciously, freely stepping into something better, I would say that we've found a fundamental flaw in our ethical system. Guilt doesn't make you a better person. It probably doesn't...
Well, I'm sorry. I just, like I said, we fundamentally disagree. I think guilt is not a negative thing. It's substantially a positive thing. And again, I'm not advocating for people to change their behavior through that negative process. I'm saying they should change their behavior through an acknowledgement of the positive goal. And so if they fail to achieve the goal, I'm not saying don't eat yourself up with guilt. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that should be the way the argument's won. I'm suggesting that you just try again. Try harder. Again, I can't... I have stated it. You want to keep saying that guilt is the focus of your philosophy. Fine. I'm saying I'm rejecting the focus of your philosophy. I think this is a canard. I think this is a Trojan horse. I think this is a fake, phony argument. You cannot tie everything to this guilt mechanism. Everything called responsibility, everything called ethics, everything called decency, everything called everything. Tie it to this negative horse and then say that it all sucks because it's all riding on this negative horse. Well, it's not all riding on that negative horse. It is not the invidious, insidious AIDS virus you're making it out to be. It's not. Okay, guilt is a very constructive and positive if you just use it differently, put a different face on it, and a different mask on it, a different mechanism on it, put limits on it. It's a very constructive thing, not a destructive thing. And because nuclear energy can be used to make bombs does not mean nuclear energy is bad. So you're just saying it is only one thing. I'm saying no, that's not what it is. That's only what you're making it into. And in this application, it has nothing to do with that. And again, I can't say any more on the subject. I've already said all I can say about the subject of guilt, and I think you perpetually, like I said, if it's the foundation of your philosophy, there's nothing we can do. We just fundamentally disagree. I don't live for guilt. I don't live on guilt. I haven't become the human being I am because of guilt. I just think this is crap. Absolute crap. Complete crap. Useless crap. And I think it's crap for a malicious purpose. I think you're just evading the subjects by painting everything with this silly guilt brush.
Even make you a more overtly better person, or a person whose conduct is likely to be beneficial. I guess that's an argument for the psychologists, but I'm of the opinion that...
Well, again, I wouldn't let psychologists argue anything in any philosophical realm, because I don't think they have any intrinsic integrity, so that's even a bad thing to bring up. Because, again, their whole motivation is to make human beings that will take any dick up their ass at any time. They're just trying to make people acquiesce to everything. So, what's the point in doing that? I mean, as a philosopher, that's silly.
That we may have reached the usefulness of guilt in our society. And I'm not saying that we jettison it, but once it gets to this point...
well, whatever. Like I said, I can't understand what you're talking about. There's no way that guilt is the evil in society. We know that a lack of guilt, a lack of a sense of responsibility is exactly the evil. The deficit, the environmental destruction, all of these things have taken place because people feel no guilt and no sense of responsibility. I just think this is the most disgusting kind of lie, to be blaming the people that are actually preventing the problem and saying they're the problem. No, it's the assholes who don't feel guilt. The assholes not ridden by any social responsibility, any sense of responsibility to change. The assholes, the selfish motherfuckers who are impervious to guilt, who have ruined human society. The liars, the thieves, the connivers, the spammers, the manipulators. These are the people that have ruined our society, asshole. I mean, this is just preposterous to blame guilt and imply that somehow it has degraded our society. That is an incredible lie.
We should at least understand that it might have stopped being anything remotely resembling part of the solution and become part of the problem.
Nonsense.
How do we motivate ourselves to do what is colloquially called the right thing? Thanks for your response.
Yeah, right. Again, it's just not that difficult, and it doesn't require... Again, you can create carrots for yourself, or you can create sticks for yourselves, in the sense that your brain can run programs, and sometimes the stick is more effective in getting you to do something, and sometimes the carrot's more effective. So sometimes it's better to imagine the better future you're going to live in if you vacuum the rug, or don't leave the thing over there because it's going to drip and leak and spoil and rot. And so you do something preventive because you understand that if I do this little thing now, I will get a huge benefit later. You can understand risk aversion. Okay, you don't need guilt to have risk aversion. There's no guilt involved, especially when it's your own welfare. It's just a mechanism of saying, look, it's not really worth what could happen. So driving 90 miles an hour probably isn't worth it. Okay, it might be exhilarating and a little bit fun, but if I really calculate the risk and what happens if I get a flat tire, or what happens if this happens or that happens, and just how stupid it is, then I could just say, yeah, let's not drive 90 miles an hour. It's not worth it. You can just come to the realization it's going to be a completely positive experience in terms of recognizing I don't need to do it. I can understand that I don't need to do it, that it's just bullshit, it's just ego nonsense, I can get over it in a minute, and yeah, move on. And you know, no problem. So quit, you know, this is just absolute crap to say that we have our thoughts don't have any ability to understand our psychology and to gently, at the right moment, apply a little pinch, or seduce with a little bit of candy. It's doable. We do it all the time internally, and we do it all the time out of necessity, because that's the law or some other thing, and we find some way to acclimate to it that is the least egregious on our psychology. And again, to describe the guilt-ridden as the social defects, the social menaces, I think is the most preposterous thing you're saying in all the things you're saying. That one is the most preposterous. We could find the villains of social dysfunction, and you will find them all to be bastards with not a shred of guilt running through them. So fuck that nonsense. But again, I'm not for guilt, but I'm certainly going to defend the idea that it is not the guilt-ridden who have destroyed human culture, decency, structure, efficiency. It is exactly the opposite character who has caused all the damage.